Welcome back for lecture 2 of our lectures on supplements and over-the-counter medications. We're going to kick off here by talking about a specific category of dietary supplements that are psychoactive. So we'll start with St. John's wort, which was our example in our previous lecture. So it's a substance that has been used for centuries, basically an herbal preparation. In its early use, it was thought to prevent demonic possession. But its current use is as a potential treatment for anxiety and depression. So if you think back to that jar that we took a look at, that container said positive mood balance, so alluding to this idea of anxiety and depression. So we do have, there have been some clinical trials done of St. John's wort, and we do see some evidence, some mixed results, but tending towards supporting its use for depression, but not really clear evidence there. And also some risk that it may interact with other kinds of prescription drugs. So if it is something that you are using or considering using, someone you know uses, it's important to know that users let their physicians know so they're able to look for those potential interactions with other important medications. So we've got some mixed results here. Not really any clear evidence supporting its potential usefulness. SAMe, this one it's a naturally occurring substance that's found in the body, and it's an active form of an amino acid. It also has been researched as a potential antidepressant, and we do have some studies that indicate it works as well as some of our prescription medication, but the studies that were done were not especially robust. They weren't especially well controlled. So we definitely still have some work to do here to figure out whether SAMe is something that we could consider as a potential antidepressant. Another one that you may have heard of, ginkgo biloba. So this one actually has a really long history of use. It's been in use for millennia in China. We don't know a lot about it yet. We don't really know what active ingredients are at work here. We do have some evidence that it reduces blood clotting and it may improve circulation. But there's some risk here because of the widespread use of other kinds of drugs that have these effects. Aspirin for blood thinning and other kinds of drugs that reduce clotting. We do have some evidence when we talk about it being used for memory support. We do have some evidence that there are slight improvements in memory in some people. So not a real clear answer on this one. For particular people, it does seem to have a slight positive effect on memory, but doesn't seem to be something that we can widely recommend to large populations who are looking to address these kinds of issues. Another really popular category for dietary supplements is weight control, and actually this market segment is the largest one in the dietary supplement market. Many Americans looking for some help with weight control. And so there are many different products that have evolved for them that have been marketed for them to consume. We don't have any that are convincing, but like all the other kinds of supplements, we don't have to have that evidence for people to market their products. So this is a real opportunity for people to be taken advantage of. We even have some times when supplements have supplements that people are taking for weight control have turned out to put their health at risk. Herbalife is an example of a company that sells these types of products. Many of their original products contained ephedra, mahuang is the actual ingredient, and it is associated with health risk. However, it doesn't seem to have affected the financial health of the company, which has gone on to be very successful and netted over $3.5 billion in worldwide sales in 2011. So we have a really interesting relationship here, and it's not one that really does a good job of preserving health. So if you are a supplement consumer or if you have questions about supplements, check out the Mayo Clinic website, www.mayoclinic.org. It's a website that contains a lot of consumer-based information that's based on the evidence base. So if we've researched it and we have data, they'll tell you what the conclusions are. If it hasn't been researched or there's mixed results, it will also tell you that as well. It's a great resource for lots of different kinds of health questions, and they have a very thorough database on dietary supplements. So definitely check that one out if you have questions. All right, we're going to move on now to talk about over-the-counter drugs. So supplements are considered a food. Over-the-counter drugs do meet the qualification of are classified as drugs, so there are different rules that apply. However, they are self-prescribed for treatment of self-diagnosed illnesses. We do spend quite a bit of money on them here in the United States every year, over $18 billion. And in terms of what we use them for, we treat ourselves for about 4 times as many health problems as doctors treat, and that's typically with over-the-counter drugs. So if you think about doctor's visits, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. The next level down is the number of illnesses that we treat ourselves with OTC drugs. So in terms of the regulatory environment for OTC drugs, in 1962, the Kefauver-Harris Amendment required that all drugs be evaluated for safety and efficacy, not just prescription drugs, but OTC drugs as well. So the FDA was the agency that got the jurisdiction here, and they were charged with reviewing all OTC drugs currently on the market. So think about how supplements were just allowed to remain on the market. We have a higher standard, a higher burden for OTC drugs. It may have been an impossible task for them to be assigned because there were over 300,000 products at the time. So the solution was that they only reviewed active ingredients. If you think about active and inactive ingredients on a drug label, the FDA only reviewed those active ingredients, which narrowed it down to fewer than 1,000 active ingredients in those 300,000 individual products. When we talk about OTC regulation, there are 3 different standards that products can be expected to meet. The first one is generally recognized as safe, and that is that given the currently available information, the ingredient is considered safe, which means is defined as a low incidence of adverse reactions. So it's important to note that no drug is entirely safe. There's nothing that has no record of adverse reactions, and that's not the standard that we expect manufacturers to meet. We're looking for this low incidence of adverse reactions. And then we also have generally recognized as effective. So this is the expectation that the drug will actually do what we're taking it for. So generally recognized as safe, GRAS, means that it's not going to make you ill, and GRAE, generally recognized as effective, means that it will do what you're buying it for, what you're taking it for. And then we've got generally recognized as honestly labeled. So these are standards that apply to over-the-counter drug regulation. Now, the label that you see when you purchase an over-the-counter drug is one that is mandated by federal law. So that fact that the labels are uniform from product to product, this was adopted through federal legislation in 1997, and it's designed to reduce confusion so that consumers are more aware of what they're taking. We've got consistency in how the labels are laid out, and there are standards to make sure that the language describing the drug is clearer and more concise and less medically based. So an important purpose here is that consumers can compare one product to another to see whether they're treating the same thing or whether it may be working differently. So when we contrast over-the-counter and prescription drugs, we see a couple of different standards. So starting in 1938, this is when they're distinguished. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act set up a specific group of drugs that could be sold only by prescription, and that's where we start to see these over-the-counter drugs emerge as a different category. So this may be for a couple of different, they may be sold over-the-counter versus prescription for a couple of different reasons, and it may be related to dosage. We see this with ibuprofen. You can purchase 200 milligram pills, but if you're looking for an 800 milligram version of the drug, then that's by prescription only. So that's an example of a drug that's over-the-counter in lower dose and prescription in higher dose. And it may be classified as over-the-counter versus prescription based on the actual chemical constitution of the drug. Prescription drugs may have higher levels of potential toxicity, so they'd like a medical professional to be monitoring your use. So that explains how drugs may be considered either over-the-counter or prescription. There's a review process through the FDA that manufacturers can ask that their products be removed from the prescription list and moved to OTC. We saw a large number of allergy drugs actually make the switch about a decade ago, about a decade and a half. So it's not written in stone that a product remains on the prescription list and is unable to be purchased through OTC methods. And manufacturers are always very interested in this because OTC drugs are more widely available. A person doesn't need to go see that gatekeeper medical professional to get the prescription. They can just purchase it on their own. Ibuprofen was originally by prescription only, along with Prevacid, and then Allegra, one of those allergy medications that made the switch. So just because a drug starts out on a prescription basis doesn't mean that that's where it's going to stay. So some psychoactive over-the-counter drugs. In terms of stimulants, the only legal over-the-counter ingredient that would be considered a stimulant is caffeine. And actually, because of the risk to cardiac health, along with other health risks, things that combine caffeine with other stimulants, like ephedrine, are not allowed to be legally sold. So an example of how that caffeine can be purchased, Vivarin, like we talked about in our caffeine lecture, contains about 200 milligrams of caffeine per dose. If anything else is being sold to you as a stimulant, it's not something that is legally authorized by the FDA, so definitely buyer beware in that situation. We do have a wider variety of sedatives and sleep aids that are available over the counter. Excuse me. An early set of them containing antihistamines and other substances were actually found to be unsafe, so those have now been blocked. And the current formulation, this does change. People are definitely interested in sleep aids. We've got a nationwide interest in improved sleep here in the United States, so we do definitely see products change. Be sure to read the label of whatever you're purchasing. But currently, the sleep aid that's available as an over-the-counter drug is an antihistamine. Basically the same ingredient that you would find in Benadryl. So keep an eye out for that, especially if you're taking a sleep aid and possibly taking an antihistamine for allergy reasons or for cold reasons. When those combine together, it could have some dangerous health effects. So be aware, if you're taking a sleep aid, chances are that sleep aid contains an antihistamine, and be careful not to combine that with drugs that you're taking for other reasons. Another important category, we talked about this with supplements, this idea of weight control products. We have seen some complicated decision making by the FDA here. We had in the 1970s phenylpropylalamine legally available over the counter here in the United States, and then we saw some concerns about safety that led to its being recalled. So it's actually the FDA has requested that companies no longer use any kind of product containing PPA because of the significant health risk that it presents. So currently there's really only one FDA-approved over-the-counter weight control drug, Orlistat or Ally. There's a long list of products that have not been approved due to lack of safety or effectiveness. Basically, any over-the-counter weight control drug that you could purchase is going to be some form of Orlistat at this time. So we'll wrap up here, and we'll pick up our last set of lectures for over-the-counter and supplements with discussing drugs for pain relief.